Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. For the rest of the year, though, it is not going to be our usual good, bad, and crazy. It is time for our very highly respected and sought-after Three Martini Lunch Awards. The Crystal Martini glass in a variety of categories over 6 special episodes. Starting today, continuing tomorrow. We'll be off for Christmas Day next week, and then we'll finish our awards Tuesday through Friday of next week. And then we're off on New Year's Day and starting back into our normal fare January 2nd, 2024. Can't believe we're already here. This is, of course, a blatant ripoff from the old McLaughlin group and their postseason awards. They used to wear tuxes. We're not, but you can imagine that we are. I'm not sure who's Fred Barnes or Pat Buchanan. Neither of us is Eleanor Clift, I can promise you that. But I guess, Jim, we start with issue 1. Today's categories are overrated, underrated, and most honest political figures. So, Jim, let's start with your choice for most overrated political figure of the past year.
So it doesn't give me any pleasure to say this, but I think I think unfortunately the title is well earned and it fits uncomfortably well, I guess you could say. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy began this year becoming Speaker after a long, difficult series of negotiations. People said that the deal that he reached with, I'm going to say the House Freedom Caucus, I know the alignment of who actually turned against McCarthy doesn't align perfectly with the House Freedom Caucus. Not everybody in it was in the same mindset on him. But basically, whatever hardliners, whatever you want to call that group, people said when he reached that deal, oh my goodness, this means they could pull the chair out from under him whenever they wanted to. And by the time autumn rolled around, they did so. And there was a whole big. I had been kind of skeptical of like, this is never going to go anywhere, and Matt Gaetz is never going to, because like, who are you going to replace him with? Who do you want? And lo and behold, you can't beat something with nothing. And in fact, yes, Kevin McCarthy did lose to nothing. The House did get rid of him with no plan for a replacement. We had about 3 weeks of really frustrating paralysis, including when the Hamas attack on Israel occurred. There was no House Speaker. It was not easy that the House could quickly get together and pass a resolution condemning it. They did do all that stuff when it got back, but I think it was a very frustrating self-inflicted wound. And then just I think kind of the cherry on top, McCarthy steps down as Speaker. It's definitely embarrassing. It's definitely a bitter pill to swallow. And I think you can argue that the compromises he made that led to the House Freedom Caucus were not all that different from many other House speakers have made, that you need to do, to get 218 votes. It's a very small House majority. I felt you could argue the punishment did not fit the crime. McCarthy steps down, says he's going to serve out the rest of his term. And then like 2 months later, he's like, nope, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm retiring at the end of the year, taking an already very narrow House Republican majority to make it even narrower, and kind of breaking a promise he'd made. And like, I get the frustration of sticking around, but the idea of don't say you're going to stick around and then, pull the ejector lever on your seat and get out early and make life harder for everybody else. So I think Kevin McCarthy, you could say, yes, Kevin McCarthy achieved his lifelong dream of being Speaker. He did not stay as Speaker very long. And I think just overall deal making and consensus building skills, Kevin McCarthy proved himself to be pretty overrated this year.
Yeah, K Street's going to wait a year. That's where he's going to end up. It's not like he's going back to Bakersfield, probably. And so he's going to be making a lot of money wherever he ends up. And looking at, it was 221 before Santos was expelled. His resignation is 220. And Bill Johnson is apparently leaving from Ohio and leaving a vacant seat until that's filled, which would be 219. So the margin of error, not much, basically one vote at this point. And so, Jim, mine is largely the same, but it goes a little broader and looks at it from a slightly different angle. I also think that Gaetz's approach to get rid of McCarthy without really having a plan in place was foolhardy. And it's one of the reasons there were only 8 Republicans that went along with that idea, I think, including him. But given the margins, that was more than enough. But McCarthy didn't do one of the biggest things that he needed to do. and that is regular order on appropriations bills. That's the main job of the House of Representatives, is to appropriate money. There's legislation on a whole bunch of other things too, but that's the main job of the House of Representatives, to get that ball rolling, kick it to the Senate, and hope that they go through regular order too. But regular order didn't happen in the House of Representatives. There was no reason for it not to happen. It was very, very limited. And then he tried to cram a bunch of regular order individual appropriations and spending bills at the very last second while he was trying to get that continuing resolution. And the rebels did not like that. His initial continuing resolution was actually much better than the one that he ended up getting, because the rebels opposed that one too. That one was actually in line with the spending cuts done with the debt ceiling deal from earlier in the year, which they also were holding a grudge against him about. But overall, and I talk about this all the time, Republican leaders aren't tough enough on spending. I've said it about George W. Bush. I've said it about Donald Trump, who basically said he wasn't touching entitlements, didn't really care about deficits, and that definitely showed over his 4 years. In the end, McCarthy didn't do what needed to be done on that front. I don't think getting rid of him at that point was the right move, but he definitely failed to do what he promised to do. And then over on the Senate side, I mean, Mitch McConnell's been very good at getting judicial nominees through when he's the majority leader. He's been good at using parliamentary tactics to help the Republican position at times. He's not been good on fighting for lower spending. And his basic approach this year was, well, as long as you vote for Ukraine money, I'm fine with whatever else you want to do. And I expect more than that out of a Republican leader. We didn't get it. And so who knows what Mike Johnson's going to do in January. He's going to need Republican help in the Senate to get it done. It's going to be hard when the Democrats control the White House and the Senate. But I expected Republican leaders to fight harder for that stuff, and we didn't get it. Time now for our first great sponsor of the day, and that is Provia. Are you one of the millions of Americans, men, women, any age, dealing with premature hair thinning and hair loss? Well, now there is a real solution that delivers on its promise without the harsh side effects. No unwanted chemicals and no need for a prescription. It's called Provia. New customers save over 50%, plus get free shipping on Provia's introductory package at proviahair.com/martini. Now, Provia supports healthy scalp circulation, delivers nourishing nutrients, and healthy hair follicle anchoring to your scalp. It's effective for men or women of any age. It's safe on colored, treated, and styled hair, and it works guaranteed, or 100% of your money you get back. Don't wait. Order now and save an extra 10% off just in time for the holidays at proviahair.com/martini. That's PROVIA hair.com/martini. All right, Jim, probably a little happier category now, and that is most underrated political figure for 2023.
So I was hoping to make this Governor Glenn Youngkin, but I don't think you can quite say, considering how the state legislative elections turned out. It's not an easy one. Obviously, kind of a rebuilding year for Republican leadership in a whole bunch of different areas. But I kind of looked at the Republican presidential primary field, and as you know, we're recording this in mid-December. It's conceivable things change between when we're recording this and when you hear it, but I think we have a sense of how this field is shaping up. I think Nikki Haley, there was not a guarantee she was going to be among the top three or the last three standing. I think you could easily have, when this process began, have wondered if Tim Scott was going to be as strong a candidate as she was. Tim Scott's out of the race. You could look at Mike Pence and say, well, he's been vice president for 4 years. Certainly very high name recognition. Maybe Mike Pence is, and Mike Pence is out of it. So look, as of this recording, Nikki Haley is probably going to be a distant third in Iowa. At least that's what it's looking like in the numbers. Better in New Hampshire, still behind Trump. And that, I think if Trump wins both Iowa and New Hampshire, it's very hard to see a scenario where he's not the nominee. She's also second in South Carolina. And I've been saying South Carolina is a winner-take-all primary state. It's not quite that. You get a whole bunch for having the most votes, and then you get, I think 3 delegates for each congressional district you win. If you win the most votes, you're probably going to win a whole bunch of congressional districts. So you'll win almost all the delegates out of that, and Trump's leading there. But I still think that, you look at Nikki Haley, the name ID she began with, the degree to, and the other great irony is that we have somebody who worked in the Trump administration for about 2 years as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and she is seen as the, arguably the default anti-Trump candidate. Now, people argue about whether she's anti-Trump enough, whether she's explicit about it enough. I keep running into people who are convinced she's really running to be Trump's vice president. I don't think that's the case, but I guess we'll see how things shake out there. But I feel like in terms of expectations, Haley has beaten those expectations, and that she's taken a decent chunk out of the support for Ron DeSantis. I mean, once again, as of this recording, Trump is still way ahead. But I think you would talk about somebody who has come out of, she's been solid in all the debates, really good in a bunch of those debates. I don't necessarily think she's going to be the nominee, but as of this recording, it is unlikely but not inconceivable that she's the nominee, and there are a whole bunch of people who can't say that. And really, you think about it, there are only really 3 people who have a shot at being the nominee. Haley has the least chance of it, but she's still in it, and more than Ramaswamy, or as of this recording, Hutchinson is still running, and there are a whole bunch of other folks who ran who you might have thought would have a better chance at it and who went nowhere. So I'd say Nikki Haley is my nominee for the most underrated politician of 2023.
Yeah, she has exceeded expectations so far, and we'll see where it goes from here. One that I thought about kicking around, but I haven't followed him closely enough, is Greg Landry, the new Louisiana governor who avoided the runoff. He did so well. But I'm going to kind of torture the definition of underrated here and go with another presidential candidate. Underrated among his own target audience, and that's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. I mean, a year ago, this guy was flying high, nearly 60% in a re-election win over Charlie Crist, who obviously was a flawed candidate. But when you look at what Ron DeSantis did 4 years earlier and barely squeaking by against Andrew Gillum, winning by 20 points 4 years later, regardless of who the Democratic nominee is quite impressive. And the results statewide and the legislature and beyond were very, very good. And Florida was much, much different than the rest of the country on midterm election night. And when you look at, generally speaking, what you would want in a Republican presidential nominee, a guy with executive experience, relatively young, actually served in the military, which is pretty rare these days, clean family life as far as we know, and a really strong record of doing what he set out to do in Florida. And when you have big majorities in the legislature, you can do that. And it seemed like he was in prime shape to really be strong in the Republican field. The early polls even suggested that. What he didn't count on was that Trump voters weren't ready to move on. And Trump was even attacking him before midterm election day. And Trump's voters aren't going anywhere, at least the vast majority of them. And so a guy who on paper should be kind of the picture of what the Republicans would want in a nominee on issues, willing to take the fight to the other party, and just in terms of an academic and family resume, it's hard to imagine a better candidate than DeSantis. But in the end, and we haven't gotten there yet, he's putting a lot of his eggs in the Iowa basket. He's investing there a lot. He's done the full Grassley, visiting all counties, and maybe he'll score an upset there. But considering where he started in the national polls at the beginning of this campaign and where he is now, it's kind of amazing to me that Ron DeSantis is where he is with the Republican electorate right now. Maybe underrated isn't the right way to describe it, but it's shocking how far he's plummeted. And it's not like he's been a terrible candidate. I think he's gotten better as the campaign's gone on. But basically, Trump voters decided they weren't leaving Trump, and he needed a lot of them to really make a headway in this race. And not only that, but he's been the target of Trump all along, and he's pretty much got a lot of the Trump voters against him, no matter what happens at this point. So maybe more of a surprise than underrated, but either way, his numbers are not what we expected them to be a year ago.
Greg, I think it's an easily justifiable nomination there. I'm holding out DeSantis for later in the week when we name political figure who is most insanely ignored by a party that drastically overestimates its chances of winning and is just throwing away terrific experience and getting wrapped up in, he holds his hands in a strange way when he doesn't have the camera on him on a debate, Yes. Which honestly, you think of it, it's a pretty precise category. I'm not sure who else is going to compete for that. But.
Where is the fastest rising area for commercial real estate? Train stations. Another huge effect of COVID are people's commutes to and from their office. While office buildings in major cities are getting cleared out, the only parts of cities that are growing are train stations. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, finally it's on to the most honest political figure of 2023. Who's on your short list? Because it can't be a long one.
So honestly, this is maybe one of the names that surprised me the most. And you could make an argument that this figure belongs somewhere else in one of these other categories. Let's note that, like, for probably the first half of this year, you and I believed that there was something wrong with John Fetterman and that he did not belong in the U.S. Senate, that his recovery from a stroke was going very, very slowly. He checked himself into Walter Reed for, I guess, like just very severe depression, had to get on meds. And between that and the, really just enormous difficulty he had communicating in that final debate against Mehmet Oz, for much of this year, we pointed out on this podcast and we said, like, Fetterman, like, should be focusing on his recovery. This man does not belong in the U.S. Senate. Now, in the second half of the year, he started getting better. I think obviously it's, if people do recover from strokes, it often takes time. It's a long, slow process. But just in the last few weeks, as we're recording this edition of this podcast, Fetterman has shocked us, his own political allies, I think a lot of people in Pennsylvania, on not one, not two, but three issues. The first, and I think most important and consequential, is his steadfast support for Israel, his full-throated condemnation of Hamas, his willingness to criticize the Squad. He went to the rally for Israel wearing the Israeli flag around his shoulders like Superman's cape. There are a lot of, Senate Democrats who have issued statements in support of it. He put up all the posters of the missing and abducted Israeli citizens, and he only took them down when those folks got released. And he's been hitting the right notes over and over again on this, which is really refreshing. Particularly, we saw a lot of Senate Democrats be very, supportive of Israel in the very beginning, and then they kind of started equivocating as the military campaign against Hamas continued. The second one was New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. At last count, there were like 31 Senate Democrats who said Bob Menendez should resign. Bob Menendez is never going to resign, so you don't do much by saying he should resign. He's just not going to do it. He's shameless. And Fetterman just keeps bringing it up. And when George Santos got kicked out, Fetterman kept, beating the drum on this and all that stuff. So that's surprising. And then the one that hits the trifecta is he said that being concerned about the border is not a sign of xenophobia, and that the Democratic Party should be trying to figure out some way to make the border more secure. And at that one, Greg, I thought I might have been dreaming. It just is really weird to see this guy who had every indication of being a down the line, party line voting, just another Senate Democrat from a state that's been somewhat purple. Fetterman is not afraid to ruffle feathers on the other side of the aisle, and he's telling his party things they don't necessarily want to hear about Israel and Hamas, on Bob Menendez and his corruption, and the border. So, shockingly to me, John Fetterman, senator from Pennsylvania, a Democrat, you are my nominee for the most honest political figure of 2023.
Yeah, not where you expected to be a year ago at this time. He seemed to bottom out after the whole Senate floor attire debate, and whether you could wear the hoodies and the shorts on the floor, and then Schumer had to roll that back because nobody else liked it. And then after that, he seemed to definitely get much more serious. Now, there was one point in the hallway where he made a joke about the protester. The joke's on him. I can't understand what he's saying. So I think there's still some lingering effects of the stroke, obviously. But you're right. He's been out there. He's been outspoken on these things. And I considered him for a while for this award. I'm waiting to see how he actually ends up voting on certain things. I think he will for Israel, whatever ends up coming on the funding bill for that and so forth. And saying it's okay to be concerned about the border can mean a lot of things in terms of what you want to do about it. So I'll wait and hold my powder on that. But I'm glad he's actually admitting that even mentioning it is not some sort of horrible, horrible thing. My choice is one of my favorite members of Congress, perhaps my favorite member of the House, Chip Roy of Texas. He is a guy who is famous for not honoring the volume restraints and realizing sometimes that the microphone actually is there to amplify the voice. But this is a guy who's very passionate, not only about the border, but about spending and about the proper role of government. And one of the things that you mentioned with John Fetterman that I think is kind of the hallmark of this category is being willing to tell your own party things they don't want to hear. And that's what he does all the time with leadership when it comes to the border and when it comes to government spending in particular. But he's not just a screamer. He's a guy who actually gets results. Remember, whether you're happy that it happened or not, the reason Kevin McCarthy ended up as speaker for whatever it was, 9 months, was because, he was losing 20-some votes on those early rounds of voting. And then Chip Roy went in there, negotiated regular order, negotiated changes to the Rules Committee, amendment process, and things like that. And whether Kevin McCarthy honored that is another issue, but he's the one who made that happen, and he brought a lot of votes along to at least get the session started after a number of days back there in early January, when everybody was just on the floor all day, because each of those votes goes through 435 members and it takes a long time. He was also not happy with the way McCarthy had not done regular order, but he did not think blowing up the whole thing was the right thing at the time. He then championed Jordan. He then championed Mike Johnson. And so he's tough, but he's also a team player. And I think on principle, he generally is pretty much right on from a conservative perspective. So that's why I picked Chip Roy. Jim, tough categories, always a fierce competition. So congratulations, or I'm sorry, depending on which award you won. I'm sure the overrated folks are really excited about that. But tomorrow we will be moving on to the political figure we're most sorry to see pass away in 2023. There certainly have been a number of those. Rising star politically, and the one fading into oblivion. So plenty to check out there on the Friday edition. So Jim, glad to kick off the awards once again. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
It's been a wild year, Greg, and I look forward to tomorrow's edition as well.
Excellent. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.